Hi everyone, this is Emily. Welcome to my channel. I'm here to show you and talk about the books I read in January 2023. I think I have 9 or 10 books here. It was quite an adventure. This was the first month that I've really broadened my horizons and read a little bit of everything. What I like to do in January, February is read winter themed books. So that was last year all through January I was reading Christmas books because I was so busy in December, but this year I mostly have winter themed books and I'll have more in February that I'll show you what I colored in my February video. So some of these would be great recommendations if you're looking to pick up something for winter. I will have more in-depth reviews of some of these books separately, individually, in individual videos, starting with this very first one, which is Icefields. I have a few passages I wanted to read, but Icefields by Thomas Wharton. This book is definitely different than anything I've ever read. It was recommended in a different book blog that I that I was recommended a gal who was actually going to Antarctica to see some glaciers, and she read this because it was recommended, and I wanted a real wintry, frosty, like realistic book of some kind, and this was recommended. This actually was a Canada Reads 2008 selection. It's a Goodreads pick. It won all kinds of awards. I'll talk more about that when I do my actual video on this book, but this book reads like an adventure narrative. It's incredibly unique, but it's basically about a man who at the turn of the century, late 1800, early 1900, goes on an expedition in the Canadian Rockies and Alberta, near the glacier that's called Albatross or something. I don't know if I can ever pronounce it right, but he's basically on an expedition studying ice and whatnot, ice caps, and he falls into a crevice and almost dies and gets trapped in there. He's hanging upside down, and when he's in there waiting to be rescued, he sees something sort of supernatural and something unexplainable, and the book kind of makes you wonder, as he's waiting there to be rescued, did he really see it? Is he imagining it? Was it his frost brain that saw it? He believes it's real, and so the book is kind of a mystery. Through the whole book, it's kind of tries to get back to the next 25 years. He keeps going back every year. He lives in London. The main character's name is Byrne, but he goes back every year to try to find that place again, because these crevices in the ice come and go. They get covered up, they open up, they get covered up. So he spends half his life trying to find it and to see this thing again and find out if it's real. And so we have a host of other characters that gather up in this lodge that come every year and do different things. And this is kind of before an actual town was really built in the area, which we do see as the book goes on. But overall, it's just a brilliant adventure narrative that has just phenomenal descriptions of polar ice caps and frigid temperatures and just marvelous glittering descriptions of ice and setting and nature that really makes you feel cold, just reading it, for no doubt. But I do have to say this book's a little weird because it is a narrative style. It is all from the perspective of Byrne, the one character, but there's not like normal dialogue in it. It's almost like he's retelling a whole story after it happened to somebody. And dialogue in this book by this Canadian writer is very brief, and there's no quotations marks in the entire book to indicate dialogue. Dialogue is marked by sort of, let me give you an example of a few bits of back and forth words with little dashes, which I think is weird. I've never seen that before. So for example, we have a little dash here. We see a dash, dash. This is where two or three people may talk back and forth, and then it goes back into the narrative. And in his narrative, it's almost like he's telling someone what someone said. So it's, like, for example, the purity and sharpness of the air. Byrne takes him to see the rock carvings. Then we have a dash. This is wonderful, Doyle says, taking out a pencil and notepad to make sketches. I may be able to use this. There, Doyle says. Let's stop there. Another dash. So you have like just 3 or 4 lines, and that's it. Then it goes back to the narrative. So it's not really hard to keep track of who's talking because there's only a few lines, and it's usually only 2 people in the scene. But it's not like a novel where you would have dialogue back and forth and a lot of that. So it's very different. This book is purely a unusual narrative lyrical style of writing. If you really are interested in what life would be like on a glacier expedition, and it's very wintry, but I will save more of that for my in-depth review and analysis and discussion of that book. So I do have, well, let's get into my, I have really torn on my favorites this month. I have a top 3 favorites. This is probably the number 3. So you've probably seen this in the Bookosphere, but this is Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. This one, I have to say, beautiful book. This is a paperback. I wish I'd bought it in hardback. I read this in about 5 days. I have to say that I think this is my first adult fantasy novel in 20 years. Like, for the longest time, I've been studying and reading classics, you know, as a literary graduate student, literature graduate student. It was classics. For hobby, I would read historical romance, children's literature, classic children's literature. I would read some contemporary fiction, but, like, I've never gotten into the fantasy realm, and other than beyond, you know, the children's literature. And so I'm like, okay, it's time to, like, get into this fantasy realm and start sharing what I discover and read. And I wanted, you know, this was a Goodreads pick. It was an editor's, Amazon editor's pick. It was a New York Times book review, 100 notable books of 2018. And it's a very wintry read, and it has a fairy tale kind of a theme. And I'm like, okay, I'll read it. And it's like, oh, wow, I'm so glad I did. Love it so much. And you're gonna have to see, I'm gonna record right after this my in detail review of this book if you haven't read it, because there are some very confusing things with the writer's writing style. It would be good to explain to you and give you some tips on reading. But basically it's about the story of 3 girls and how they intertwine in this kind of wintry kingdom that is trapped in perpetual winter by this dark fairy fairy king. But it really surprised me because there were elements of romance, that very undertone of it, that ended more in a romance that I did not expect. And it's just this magical, like, there's the little European village, you know, that's covered in snow where they're stuck, and then there's a magic road called the Stark Road that goes to this other land where nobody ventures, where the Stark King comes and everyone's afraid of him, and so they hide from him. But on the other side of this road, when you get there, it's just this glittering, magical, gorgeous, like almost like the Avatar of the ice world land, and it's just beautiful and just crystalline, you know, ice castles and waterfalls that seem to come from nowhere. And even the creatures kind of make me think of Avatar creatures. They're blue, but they're translucent, and you can see their veins, like blood running through, like waterfalls, and just glowing white hair, and just this. It's just such a gorgeous, like, description of not only the Stark. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Staryk, Stark land, and the icy, snowy land where the humans live as well. And so it's just very magical, and I was, beyond the things I explained to you in my other video, you'll see it's a little, I'll talk about this book way more, but check out that video. I'm going to link that below. So that is Naomi Novik, Spinning Silver, and I've already purchased her book Uprooted to read next because I loved it so much. All right. So next I read, this is probably my favorite book of, well, in this lot is my favorite book of all time, but beyond that I'm going to talk about my favorite book that I read this month, which is no doubt by Heather Dixon Walwork, The Enchanted Sonata. I actually read this on my Kindle Oasis, and then I loved it so much that I went and I bought it. I actually bought it 3/4 of the way through because I knew I was gonna love this book, and I wanted a beautiful hardback copy for my shelves. It's absolutely amazing. It is a retelling of the Nutcracker. I have never been a fan of the Nutcracker. I don't know. We go to the Nutcracker ballet every year for Christmas. The last few years, okay. I watched like the Disney's Nutcracker Three Realms movie. Yeah, you know, whatever. It's always been like, oh, this Christmas play and or Christmas movies or Christmas story, but there's not a lot of Christmas in the Nutcracker other than it takes place on Christmas Eve. But once you leave Christmas Eve, go into this other realm, it's not really Christmassy anymore. But anyway, this is brilliant. It is so good. I love it so much, and it's non-traditional, not just about the Nutcracker. So it's basically about, in this book, there's a Clara. She's 15. She lives in Victorian England. She's a piano player. She, her father has passed away, and she gets a storybook she starts reading, and she gets transported into a storybook. But you see a lot of what's happening in this other realm, which is, and I'll do a separate review of this book as well, more specifically, but basically it's about a magician who has a vendetta, who comes and to this magical land, kind of looks like a Russian fairy land, you know, and he comes in and plays an Enchanted Sonata with his flute to turn all the children into toys, and turns the prince into a Nutcracker, and the Nutcracker, he gives him the challenge. The Nutcracker has to try to figure out how to save the kingdom and turn the children back into human children. And so, but this book is just so stuffed fat of, there's not very much mention of Christmas. The Christmas is mentioned in the very first scene, Christmas Eve. Again, that is traditional across the board with the Nutcracker retellings. But if you want like a book that feels like the holidays or just feels like winter magic, like I associate Christmas with things that are magical because of the lights and the music and the cute little Victorian light up houses and stuff I have in my decor. But beyond, it's not really Christmassy, but it's just this brimming like with enchantment magic. And when she gets over to this land, like the description of the castles and the things made out of candy and the sleighs and the description of the glittering snow and the it's just incredibly, and the writing is very advanced, very poetic almost, and I absolutely love it. And there's an adventure in here. There's an undertones of a romance. It's about you know, a girl coming of age, and it's completely takes off the opposite direction of the Nutcracker, but there's nothing cheesy in it or anything. I think it has, let's see. Yeah, it's just a really gorgeous book. I mean, I never thought I would love it, and I love it. So I'll talk about them more in my review, and I'll read some passages, so check that out as well. My Alexa's having a fit. But anyway, love it so much. My second favorite book is another retelling of the Nutcracker that I'd say I like second after that one. There goes my telefono. Then that one is by M.A. Kutzniar, and it's Midnight in Everwood. Oh my goodness, another book I absolutely love. Another retelling of the Nutcracker, completely different. In this book, Clara is really called Marietta, and she is a grown woman. She's 21. It does take place in the same time period. However, this one is more about a woman in this society in Victorian England who is, her parents are trying to get her a husband. She's already becoming an old maid, and they're trying to marry her off to this rich bachelor genius clockmaker scientist guy, Drosselmeyer, who is, and she doesn't want that. She wants to be independent. She wants to be a dancer. She doesn't want to get married. She's being forced to like wear corsets and pretty dresses, and she just kind of wants to, you know, dance or wear pants or whatever. And she Drosselmeyer turns out to be kind of evil and puts a spell on her. She gets locked into a clock and gets turns up in this magical land called Everwood. And it's like inside of Everwood there are doors to other lands that take you to other places, but she's trapped in Everwood and she can't get to any of those doors or get back to where she was. And again, just another just completely like enamoring, magical, glittering, sparkling, just lovely descriptions of food and treats and sweets and just nature and just like decor and creatures and flora and fauna and just winter bliss everywhere. Very enchanting, very alluring, and it's actually, Nottingham to 1906. I'll read you the back. Marietta longs to be a ballerina, but as Christmas draws near, her dancing days are numbered as she must marry and take her place among society for the new year. But a mysterious new neighbor, Toymaker Drosselmeyer, heralds the arrival of magic and wonder in her life. So anyway, she gets into this land and she's trapped there. And there's kind of like a Lord of the Rings War of Worlds going on inside of there. 3 different kingdoms fighting. She gets locked up by the Bad King, and it's just, I love the original Nutcracker book. I thought I had it here. I do, actually. Here is the actual Nutcracker by Alexander Dumas. But these retellings are different. They take different spins. They're written more contemporary. But if you just want like a magical, happy feeling, if you're a sucker for beautiful writing, and like fantasy, I think you'll love both of these books. Honestly, like they're pretty equal. I think Enchanted Sonata is my favorite, but they're really pretty equal. And I will do some quotes and reads and more of that in my other separate videos of those books. All right, enough babbling. Another book I have to talk about. I already released my full video review on it. I can link that below as well. It's by Matt Haig. It's The Midnight Library. This is the first book I read for starting January 1st, 2023. Read it in 3 days. Matt Haig traditionally writes also children's literature, and I had read and loved The Boy Who Saved Christmas and the girl who invented The Girl Who Saved Christmas, or The Boy Who Found Christmas. It's been a couple years since I read them. One of them was just made into a new Netflix movie, The Boy Who Saved Christmas, right? Yeah. Anyway, love those books. Did not know he wrote adult literature. Came across this by a fluke. And any time you have a book about books, a fiction story that's about books, I'm in. Absolutely brilliant. This is a philosophical book that touches very lightly, sensitively on the topic of suicide and depression. It does not show a suicide scene. It's only slightly hinted at. It's about this character whose life is in the crapper, so to speak, in modern times. The book builds like a suspense novel, and it right before she decides she's thinking about taking action because everything is just going terrible, and then next thing you know, she's wandering the streets and comes across this nighttime library she doesn't recognize. She goes inside this library, and there's just conveyor belts full of books. And a librarian comes to explain to her in this fantasy library, it's like a surrealism, magical realism is what this book genre is. All of these different books are different lives she can test on and try out by opening a book and be transported into that life. Because, the point and the moral of this story is everybody always thinks the grass is greener on the other side. If all the people live with their regrets. I regret that I didn't do this. I regret I did do that. My life would be so different if I had done this or not done that. So, okay, you want to find out what your life would have really been like if you had done this or had not done that. Open that book, go in, live that life, and test it out and see for yourself. And she does that with hundreds of different little lives and little books. And each one she's disappointed, and every time she feels disappointment, she gets transported back to the library. And so over time she realizes her life is perfect just as it is. But it touches on a lot of like string theory, time travel, parallel universe. Brilliant, love it. I cannot wait to read his next book, How to Stop Time, which is a similar kind of a story. and I picked that up as well, and that will be on my TBR list coming up here soon. So let's talk about one I read on my Kindle. Oasis. I did do a review of this. It is called Holiday by Gaslight. I kind of want to purchase this now because it's a gorgeous cover and I really liked it. It's a shorter novella. This is one I didn't get to in December, so I did it. Read it in a few days, just behind the scenes with my other stuff, and I really enjoyed it. It takes place right after the death of Prince Albert, when Queen Victoria obviously was queen, and right when at the booming age of Victorian history and the Victorian era, where industrialization was starting to happen and advancements in technology and moving into gaslight. Like this was all about. It's a romance novel, okay, clean romance novel, but it's all about like the character in this book. Her father is going broke because he's trying to bring in all these modern inventions into their estates, and it's bankrupting them, and he's spent his daughter's dowries. Ooh, not so good. But what I love about this story is that it starts out with the characters already know each other, not, oh, I'm meeting my potential romance partner, and they don't like each other from the very first scene, and they've already been courting, and it's all kind of going. So I like it, just jumps right in there, and I love the description of like holiday everything, which is more toward the end when there's a gathering, but most of the book just reads like a regular Victorian era romance, but the writing is very pretty. The characters are quirky. It's a little suspenseful, and you really feel for the characters. So I don't think this should be just a Christmas book. I mean, there's a little bit of mention at Christmas, but it's not like the beginning and the end. The rest is really just focused on the romance. The Christmas plays more about just the time of year is really how it fits into this book. So that's what I read. I loved it. Holiday by Gaslight. It's by Mimi Matthews. I picked up her other book called The Belle of Belgrave Square, which is a paperback. I think I have it. I don't know where I have it. But anyway, very excited to read that. Another thing I read on my Kindle, I think I might have already deleted it. It was another Christmas book. I did delete it. Another Christmas book called Resting Scrooge Face, which was really like a short story novella. It was a free Kindle Unlimited recommended pick. It was alright. Just nothing really to write home about. The one Christmas book I didn't get to. And it was, I don't even, if I'm like, I read that the 1st of January and I almost don't remember. Like, that's how insignificant it was. So it was like, if you want a cheesy rom-com, holiday romance, it was cute. I remember that it was, don't judge a book by its cover when, romance kind of a style, but I don't even remember enough to comment on it, so I'm not going to. All right, so let's talk about my favorite book of all time, my favorite book I think ever written, which is also a work of classic literature, which of course you know and everybody knows. Surprising how many people have not read it and who only know the story or have seen the movie, and that is Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Yes, it's nothing you've never heard of before, but I don't know if you've read it or not, but I can tell you that I have here, let me show you. I read it in my very expensive, it's like $199 to buy this now if you can find it on eBay, my Easton Press Charles Dickens Christmas Carol leather-bound gold-plated edition with illustrations by Robert Ingpen. This is a limited book. I read it every year in this and continue to study it. I did finally get, let me show you some of these. It has some gorgeous illustrations in it. I did buy it finally in this Barnes & Noble edition so that I can completely mark it up, but I just want to show you some of these pages. It's absolutely beautiful. Really beautiful book. Very thick pages. So A Christmas Carol is one of those books that if you know the story, cool. If you've watched the movies, great. If you have not read A Christmas Carol, you are going to be in for a big surprise. Of course, you'll recognize a few lines or passages you've probably seen in really good renditions of the movie. I think that Alistair Sim did the best one. I think, was it the early 1940 version? The Jim Carrey one, I have to say the Disney one is really good and pretty accurate as well. But those movies just show the overall story. The writing is what made the story. The writing is what put it into movies. The writing, it is so absolutely incredible. And the writing is just like when I was teaching English at the college here, I taught a 4-week unit on descriptive writing and how to write descriptively, and I used this book along with some Hans Christian Andersen, my other favorite descriptive writer, to show my students what is descriptive writing, what makes descriptive writing, what is the purpose of descriptive writing, what is good descriptive writing. And Charles Dickens, and this book particularly, is the best. Like the introduction to Scrooge. Let's see if I can find it here. I can go right to it. The introduction to Scrooge and his sort of how they describe him is what made him Scrooge. Let's see if I can find that. I'm going to have to do a separate review on this one and talk about some of these passages, but there is... Oh, that's the ghost. I love it so much. Not only does this paint a great picture of Victorian England, this book it's not about the story, it's about the writing. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to find it, but there's a whole page that lends this amazing description to the character of Scrooge with just brilliant, quirky, unique metaphor and analogy, and it's just... and the way that the setting and the time period is described, you just, if you want to learn about how to write descriptively, this is a book you need to read. So I'm going to do a separate video on it. I just realized I've never done that. I don't know why, but I'll do a separate video on it, and I'm going to talk all about it. I'm going to share some passages, but it's some of it is actually hard to read, like in the center section, which is the section 2, which technically takes place during the time of the Ghost of Christmas Present. There's some very complicated writing. Like, you sometimes have to read a passage several times to understand what it's saying, or if you're not really honed in on there. And it gets very lyrical. Obviously, writing in the Victorian era is complicated, very mature writing, but it's just... It's one of the few stories that has such a inspirational message in it. There's a lot of underlying messages, but Christmas Carol, I read not for the story, because I know the story. Everybody knows the story. I read it for the writing, the way the words lay on the page, the way that they come to life, the writing style, how they play together. So that is why I recommend Christmas Carol, and it is my favorite book of all time. So I have a few more books here that are YA, that are sort of wintry themed, except for one, which is not wintry themed, which is also very mature writing. And I'm going to show you this. This book I read is called Seacrow Island by Astrid Lindgrin. Astrid Lindgrin wrote Pippi Longstocking. She's a Scandinavian writer. This is technically considered a children's book from this series, the New York Classic Children's Library. I have a lot of these books, and they're not stories that you can normally find, not like ones you've normally heard of in this series. If you were to pull up a list, most of them you'll probably have never heard of. This one is one of them as well, but I love Pippi Longstocking, and this one is about a widowed father and his four children who leave. They live in Norway, I guess. There's a Seacrow Island. The father wants to escape to this summer island that's just way out there. And his oldest daughter's 19, and a lot of it is from the perspective of the daughter, who's 19, who's marriageable age. So this takes place, way back in the day. But most of this book is about these. This is actually, ironically, a summer theme, but there is a beautiful winter scene because they do come back once in the winter. But mostly this is an amazing, beautiful description of sort of just a gorgeous, like, flowing, full of beauty Summer Island. Like this, it's just full of descriptions of what this island looks like and feels like and sounds like. Another great example of descriptive writing, and it really just pulls you in. Like you can feel like you're there. Like you want to go to Seacrow Island for your entire summer. And it's this cottage called Carpenter's Cottage that was old, rundown, beaten up cottage that the family kind of reinvents and makes it their own. And then it's all about the adventures that these children have on the island. I enjoy the parts the best that are from the perspective of the 19-year-old daughter as she's writing her diary, which is very adult-like, very mature. And then there's also some scenes that are from the perspective of Melker, who is the father, and he's a little quirky. He makes me think of like Rick Moranis in some of those old 80 movies where she's kind of a dorky, big glasses, kind of a goofy dad kind of a guy. And the daughter's like taking care of the children because their mother's dead and taking care of her father. But then we get into the perspectives of the kids and on their adventures on the island, and they're saving seals and they're doing all these things on this summer island that's way out there in the middle of nowhere. And storms come in and all these things happen. And I do tune out a little bit when we get into the adventure parts of the from the perspective of the younger kids. Because the writing style changes. It's not nearly as like gorgeous and beautiful and like standoutish and as adult-like writing as you get from the perspective of the other two characters. So it does have a multiple point of view, but it is definitely worth reading. I enjoyed it a lot. I mean, it's full-on text. I mean, you know, it kind of blows my mind in studying children's literature how children today would not probably be able to read the books that were written for children at the turn of the century, 1800s, 1900s. They're just too adult-like, like too many hard words. The kids would be fading out after 10 minutes. They want to get to their Xbox. It just probably isn't going to happen. So, okay. I also read this series for a nice wintry read. Children's literature. This is by Tove Jansson, who is a Finnish writer, called Moominland Midwinter. Absolutely love these little books. There's a series. I bought two others. One is a summer one. I think one is some other adventure one. I think there's 6 or 9. There's a bunch of them. This was my first. I bought it largely because I love winter. I love children's literature, and I love the cover. And these are cute little collectible books, and it is full of illustrations. This author, Tove Jansson, was born in Helsinki, the daughter of a sculptor and graphic designer from Finland's Swedish-speaking community. Throughout her life, Tove Jansson wrote, drew, and painted in her studio in Helsinki on the Gulf of Finland, and has Moominland Midwinter is the 5th novel published in 1957. It's really quirky. I love the little pictures in it. It's got like a little map here of the town. Show you a little bit. Cute little chapters. So it kind of reads like a book you could read out loud a chapter a night to your kids. Has pencil illustrations and black and white illustrations. It's about this little creature that kind of this guy here. So first of all the creatures in this book are not normal creatures that we know of. So that was kind of hard for me because I couldn't get a good visual on them. And it's about this creature whose family hibernates all winter. So he's never been awake in the winter. For some reason, he wakes up in the middle of dead winter and his whole family's still hibernating, and the world is a white blanket of snow. He has never seen snow. He doesn't know what to do with or make of snow. He learned from his parents that snow is dangerous and bad. That's why we sleep in the snow. And his parents sleep for, weeks, months, and he ventures out on his own for like survival and the world is asleep and like in the woods, the snowy woods, and he comes across a few random winter type creatures and has some adventures, and there's some really cute descriptions of what it's like being in the snow for the first time, learning about snow for the first time, feeling snow for the first time. Great descriptions of snowstorms that come in. What I do not like about the story are, like I said, this author completely made up all of the type of characters, and they all have weird names. So many weird names I can't even, like Moomin Troll. He's Moomin Troll. There's a character named Too Ticky. There's a character named My Little My. There's a character named Grok, or the Grok. There are some that are hard to pronounce, and there's so many of them I can't keep straight. And because they have weird names that are like made up, and maybe the author's kids made up, I don't know, but weird names. They're not people, they're not animals, they're like made up creatures, and they have weird, odd names that like slow you down from the flow of the reading you're reading, and then all of a sudden, you know, too ticky, whatever, like it was just really difficult. So that's the only thing I didn't like. So my only recommendation would be to be prepared for that. But I did like the adventure of it. I loved the description of the winter. And so the illustrations are kind of fun. It's just a little weird. I'm going to have to read the other two to see if I can like it more or get beyond those other two issues. But overall, I do think it's very different than anything I've ever read. And it has a lot of passages that I did like. So it's still worth to give it a go if you're interested in children's literature. Lastly, I read from the 1930s is when this series started. Trixie Belden, the very first Trixie Belden book, The Secret of the Mansion. This is more middle grade teen, back in the day, teen like Nancy Drew or Hardy Boys, in these kind of vintage hardback books. I believe the first 15 books in the series were written by the same author, and then as the decades went on, other authors kept writing stories for the Trixie Belden series under the trope and or the series name, or which is like a trademark name. So this is the very first one though. It's The Secret of the Mansion. I just love the vintage look of these books, and I have a whole series of them. What I don't compared to Nancy Drew, these girls are younger. I'd say 13, 14. Nancy Drew's like 16, 17, so it's a little less mature. Whereas Nancy Drew is solving mysteries and crimes with her father. This girl is just kind of like lives on this beautiful like New England apple farm, and she befriends a rich girl who moves into a mansion next door, and they go around the community and solve mysteries, not crimes, mysteries, things that locals can't figure out of what's happening. And it's all about like summer adventures and girl friendship and things like that. Don't like it as much as Nancy Drew. I've only read one. I did buy the first 5 in this hardback vintage set. I think they are beautiful, and I'll show you the inside. I do really like here it has a lot of illustrations, so almost like it makes me want to color them in, since I do a lot of adult coloring, and I have an adult coloring channel, by the way. It's called The Coloring Oasis, if you want to check that out. But yeah, so we have a lot of that going on, but it reads very, very much like I don't love this girl in it, Trixie. She makes me think of Haley Mills in the original Parent Trap movie, the one that lived with the father in California. That was all like, "Hey, cool," and "Golly gee, pops," like that's kind of how she talks. And blonde, short hair. I just totally think of her. I don't know why, but if you remember reading these when you were young, if you want a little nostalgia, a little bit of you know, middle grade kind of girl stories, adventure story. Very simple writing. I learned a lot of passages I even wanted to mark down. You can read it really quick. Some of it might get a little boring, but some of it I liked. So I don't know. I'm going to read some more and then I'll give a better review. So that is everything I read in January 2022. I'm going to make a video and tell you what I'm reading for February. And then, of course, I'm going to review some of these books more in depth in a separate video. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't for more upcoming great books.